Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the M3 Market Update. My name is Melody Wright, and I'm here to give you context about the residential and commercial real estate markets against the backdrop of our global macroeconomy. There's a lot going on out there, and one of the things that I wish I had had during the GFC and during that and those inflection points in late 2006, 2007 was a better understanding of macroeconomics. And so I try to mix the micro and the macro in this show where you can see boots on the ground as well as what's going on in the larger global economy. Welcome back. Today is February 12th, and yesterday was the Super Bowl. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I didn't get to watch it. I'm sure it was fun and fantastic, but we're here today to talk about, what's happening, and as well, this show will be dedicated in large part to the deep dive or boots on the ground that I did in Atlanta. But first, I just want to start with some overall stats. There's a lot of narrative out there about soft landing. What's going on with the economy, a lot of conflicting data. And again, I just want everyone to stay steady. Don't get taken away by headlines in either direction. Let's just watch the path. Let's just see what's happening from here. Let's look at the data. And I'm not talking about one data point on home prices. This market is way more complicated than that. And I think when this is all said and done, people are going to understand that people were looking at way too limited information. And so the idea of this show is really to give you more context, more data, and so we can triangulate and figure out what's going on, because I do believe that we're coming into an inflection point. You can feel it in Florida, especially Texas, Tennessee. And California has been acting a little weird, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the stats. But first, I just want to talk about mortgage applications. And so, National Mortgage News, NBA, everybody tried to put a positive spin on last week's results. But what I want you guys to know is that seasonally adjusted and non-seasonally adjusted purchase applications were down week over week and year over year. Okay. They don't give you a ton of information unless you buy that series. You don't get all the data points. They just give you their summary. But we can tell this from their summary. Now, refi was up 12%. What I can't even tell based on the way they write about this is whether they seasonally adjust refi. I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I can tell you it was up 12%. And that's kind of what gave a positive reading on the mortgage applications. And so I'll say again, somebody doing a refi in this rate environment that's because of distress. Now, some may say, oh, it's home improvements. Well, that might be what somebody writes down on their application, but I can guarantee you they'd be paying for those home improvements on a, low interest credit card or some other way just to get that done, because a refi is not a hassle free and there are closing costs. As my buddy Travis will run those numbers, but those refis aren't cheap. And so the fact that those applications are up means that there is distress out there. Now, applications are applications. They are not closed sales. And so what's going to be, or even closed refinancing. So what's going to be very interesting is to see how this translates. And so in the 80 cities, yep, I'm up to 80 now. The 80 cities I track, we actually had sales up year over year. And this is, of course, in December. We still don't have January numbers yet. So from November to December, we had sales up year over year. I'm sorry, December to December of last year, but they were actually down month over month, just a tad, just a hair. And so I use Redfin for those numbers. And again, they include some new and some existing sales. They don't have everything. So we look at multiple data sources, but we will be getting that information soon about existing home sales and new home sales. But what I'm seeing right now is that year over year, December was up, but month over month was down. And so, we're getting into some seasonality. We talk about inventory. We don't yet have January inventory numbers, but I'm hoping any day now from the Fed. They published on the 9th last month. So hopefully today, maybe we'll get them. But if you look back in over the past, since 2016, actually, the drop in inventory from November to December averages 10%. This drop this year was only about 5.5%, so almost half. So, inventory is starting to build out there, and that is really going to change the game. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this when we dive into Atlanta here, real quick. But I think that is what's changing the game in Atlanta right now, just a tad. And so before we get into Atlanta, which is my Substack this week, I call it Terminus, First Stop Atlanta. And Atlanta was our first stop on this last massive tour. And so I want to dive into Atlanta a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to talk about New York Community Bank. So this is a big deal what's going on out there. I back in the spring, I talked about the fact of being a little excited that those signature assets would lead to true price discovery. And then my excitement as the FDIC came in and the auction process was prolonged. And then you heard from Brookfield that essentially, the FDIC didn't take the highest bid. Um, my friend, Nobody Special did a great show on that. I'll link that in the show notes. Is what's pinned on my, well, actually, no, it's not pinned, but I'll link it in the show notes. So, but this is a situation to watch. They took over $500 million in what we call provision for loan loss. And just think about that as saying, hey, I know that in the future, I'm going to have to take a loan loss on this. So I'm going to go ahead and provision it through my income statement and set up a reserve on my balance sheet. And I know that's complicated stuff, but the simple way to think about it is I'm going to have losses. I better put some money in the bank. And so what's very fascinating about this is that there were only two loans for the majority of this provision. Now, last week, I kind of said on Twitter with some people that I was talking to is that this just felt very eerily familiar. It reminded me so much of when my company, as I've talked to you guys about back during the GFC, we were the first ones to take the massive write downs of the big five because we had been sold. Our new owner wanted a purchase price adjustment. And so we went out there early. And although I and my executives were definitely looking at those headlines every day, it seemed like every day we were in the news. Nobody else seemed to be looking at them. And that's how the surprises came later. And so I would encourage everyone to pay close attention to what's happening at New York Community Bank because this is just, it's not the end. It's not the terminus. It is just the beginning. And there is so much of this out there. I encourage you to go to the Substack. Also, Rudy's Substack has some great commercial real estate charts this week. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay, so let's talk about Atlanta. In the Substack, I talk about the fact that, what's going to be very funny about a lot of these deep dives is I've lived in many of these cities. I traveled for work. I relocated for work my entire career. And so because of that, and because I was in financial services, I have lived in a lot of places. Plus, I moved around a lot as a kid. So this is coming in handy now. But I actually lived in Atlanta, back in 1996, right before I went to grad school, working the Olympics as what was kind of termed a hospitality guide. That was, IBM had brought in all of its executives and they gave them tickets to all these events. So I would ride with them, make sure they got to these events, make sure if they needed anything. And also theoretically was there to help Russian translation, but most folks that were traveling from Russia spoke really great English and didn't want to, they wanted to practice their English. They didn't want to talk to me in Russian, which was probably a good thing. But anyway, so I've actually lived there. My dad moved there when I was 12 years old. I've been traveling to Atlanta that time. And now people will argue, what I write about in Substack, I give a lot of different data, but I'm talking about the greater Atlanta metro. I'm talking about the inner rings. I'm talking about the outer rings. Now, the way that we get data, a lot of times you don't even know what they're defining as Atlanta. You don't know if it's the MSA, or you don't know if it's just a certain amount of zip codes. And so we are doing our best here to take the data that's available to us and get a bigger picture of what's happening in Atlanta. And that's the greater metro, not just the downtown or the city proper. And so, what I want to say is that, of course, guys, there's going to be neighborhoods that do better than others. Absolutely, that's going to happen. And I can't. I looked it up because I wanted to see what kind of task it was, but there are over 42,000 or about 42,000 zip codes in this country. 42,000. That's impossible to track. And so you guys hear often I talk about don't just look at the aggregate data, but we could be here all day and night drilling down to a zip code. And there are services out there that do that. And so, reach out to me if you are actually actively in the market and you need some information on a specific zip code. I can probably point you in a certain direction, but we have to generalize a little bit here, or we would never understand what's going on. So we're doing our best to put the macro and micro together. So some quick stats on Atlanta. The population, I was actually surprised, and I've been going to Atlanta for some time, and I've also lived in Charlotte, but Atlanta has a population of about 499,000. Now that's smaller and significantly smaller than Charlotte. And I don't know, I don't know, maybe it was my little child brain thinking that Atlanta was bigger than it was. But something that's important about Atlanta is they had their net migration from basically April 2020 to July 2022 was 0.10%. So their population change was a growth of 0.10%. So the national average was 0.5. To give you a comparison, Charlotte was at 2.6. So I believe that likely we are going to start seeing even more negative migration from Atlanta based on just some of the stories you're hearing about there, anecdata. But of course, we're focused on the data. The other thing here is that the household median income is around $77,655, while the median sale price is around $410,000. Now, with a median income of around $78,000, depending on which mortgage calculator you use, and if you put a 20% down payment down, that means you're going to qualify for a house of about $300,000. So, already we're seeing affordability issues here in Atlanta. Some quick stats: a change in median sales year over year per Redfin. Now, this is Redfin; they don't have everything. It was actually up 2.3%. We're going to talk about that. And the change month over month, it had been negative when I looked at the data in November. And so this is an update from the video I did with Travis, is at 1.23%. So actually a positive month over month. And I think this is largely to do with the builders going gangbusters out there, doing every kind of incentive you can possibly imagine. Okay, and so we are also seeing increases in inventory. So month over month, the increases in inventory there are 10%. Year over year, 12%. So that is significant increases in inventory. The other thing I want to say, just to give you some, perspective on changes of homes sold. And sorry, guys, yeah. So the 2.3% and the 1.23% I was saying increases in sales. I apologize. That's actually the changes in home price. So those little minimal changes in home price. Again, we've talked about that has a lot to do with the mix. It has a lot to do with the fact that it's your higher homes transacting, and NAR has a great, or National Association of Realtors has a great chart for that. I'll try and put a link in the show notes later for that. But increase in sort of the homes sold year over year is 15%. That's fairly significant, and month over month at 16%. Now, guys, as I said, sales were actually negative month over month when you looked at October to November. So this is a change in trend, and I really do believe this has to do with the builders. One other quick fact about Atlanta is, or a couple of other quick facts, is that listings for sale are around 4,847 right now. listings for rent around 7,416, and number of Airbnbs around 11,503. Their multifamily occupancy is actually down, lower than the national average. They're at 92.2. And essentially, national average is at 94.4. And we also know Atlanta is in the top 5 in terms of how much multifamily delivery they are getting this year. So this is very, well, what is about to happen in Atlanta is going to be very important to watch. And then we talk about commercial real estate in Atlanta. They have about 9 million square feet up for sublease right now, and they are already in a vacancy around 14%. So I believe, that there is, there is trouble ahead for downtown Atlanta. That one of the, I add in the Substack some really interesting stories. One is about the underground mall that has been foreclosed. That is underground is kind of where I went when I was a little kid. That whole underground mall was built within structures that were built during Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is something I talk about a little bit in the Substack. And in this Substack, and I hope you do read it, but I'm trying to dive into why that this isn't the first time that we've had narratives about, the South revitalization, or the South is the place to be, or, just kind of that boom mentality. It has happened quite a bit in our U.S. history, and we are in the latest iteration. The problem is no one has really, in any way changed the structural issues there for good. And so that transition from the agrarian sort of economy into a different type of economy has never really happened. And so there are just not enough jobs in the South. So all those folks come down, sure, you're going to have the retirees. They're not going to, need a job, and they will themselves create jobs. But you have to be very careful about the planning and that transition. Change management and project management are two things that we've kind of lost sight of right now. And so the other thing I talk about is a shipping container village that has been created called the Melody, believe it or not. And this is for the homeless. And so this is going to be, we've reached the highest level of homelessness since we've started keeping these records. I know a lot of people will say that has to do with immigration. And I don't disagree that that's playing a part. And I think we're going to talk a lot about it. But let's not let the political narratives out there really keep us from seeing what's happening. And so I'm not saying immigration isn't playing a part. I'm saying this is a bigger issue. You can go back, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but the movie that won a lot of awards with Frances McDormand, I think that's her name in it, Van Life, essentially. This theme has been, this has just been building since the GFC. And so this homelessness or homeless crisis is not just about immigration. And so we've got to figure out these solutions. Now, the other thing that I talk about is the vacancy. And so we learned last summer that in Atlanta for rental units, there was about a 1 in 10 vacancy. And what has that led to? Recently, over 1,200 instances of squatters actually squatting in these vacant homes. So I know everybody is out there telling you there's an inventory shortage. But guys, if you just get in your car and you drive around, you are going to see there is so much vacancy. And this will be a theme that we talk about all year long because it's everywhere, even in the places that you just would not expect it. And so this is where I encourage everybody just to take a different turn, just to do a little driving around to see what's going on, just a bit of asking. And so with all of these Airbnbs dreams, all these long-term rental dreams, all the fix and flippers that have now abandoned those because they don't have the money to really finish them, this is creating that vacancy out there. And it's in Johnson City where I am. I did some touring of just this city this past week and found an entire apartment community. We'll talk more about that later, but there is a ton of vacancy. That leads to squatters. We just simply do not have enough law enforcement, to deal with this issue. And it's going to become a bigger issue. And we're going to hear more and more about it. And so ultimately, the biggest thing that we saw in Atlanta was just over 500 new build communities, guys. And again, smaller than Charlotte and more new home communities. When you look at the map, it is just staggering. And when you look at the drone footage, which I'll link those in the show notes as well. There are just so many new build sites, and even the drone footage can't really capture the scale, because you will take all this drone footage, you'll be overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, there's so much, and then you'll drive a mile down the road and see the same thing. And if it were me on the other side, I would just think I'm looking at the same one, but you're not. And so this is why getting out there and looking is just so important. And I'm feeling really passionate about this, because it is, as we go to each one of these cities, it is just overwhelming, just the misinformation out there. And guys, I'm not giving you every piece of information, but I'm trying to give you the tools as well, to go out there and look for yourself. I'm one person. I haven't been able to organize any of my volunteers, even though I promised. I told you guys I was going to do a show in a couple of days. That didn't happen. I'm still trying to get settled into living close to family. It's an interesting. I'm adapting, but it means that my schedule is never quite my own these days. And so forgive me, I'm done making promises, but I'm really going to do the best that I can. So what are my final words on Atlanta? Guys, there is so much building out there, and it's going to suck people from the inner rings into those outer rings, and there is going to be a shell left. So it is really important when you go out there looking for a new place to live that you think about all these things. What's my infrastructure? What's the traffic? What's the demographics? Who's living next door to me? Because all of this will impact your equity, impact your investment. And because, it is an investment, the home that you buy. It's not a casino. You're not, don't expect to make a ton of money off of it, but it is one of the largest investments you'll ever make. So these things are so critical to consider. Okay, so going long. So I'm going to race through some of these statistics for you. I might not hit them all. I'll put them in the show notes. And again, guys, eventually I'll get there and show these on the screen. Just really trying to get a routine around all of this stuff amidst all the change that has been in my life as well. So just continue to be patient with me a little bit longer. And of course, this is all in the Substack, if you guys want to subscribe. Okay, so inventory for sale increased about 0.81, so almost 1% week over week, but importantly, 7.74% month over month. So we are just coming back from that little dip that we had from November to December, and California is roaring back. I don't know, if I had been tracking this a year ago, maybe this is their seasonal trend. They really slow down and then they really speed up. I'm going to go dive into the Fred numbers to get a better sense of that later this week. But and also just quickly, although we're still a little bit down compared to the 25-week average, we're down about 3.23%. But year over year, we are up with inventory for sale at 6.24%. Okay, quickly, top cities with largest percent increase in inventory week over week, 128 to 24. That's going to be San Ramon at 12.36%. That's California. San Jose, California, 6.75%. Lakewood Ranch, Florida, get ready to hear that name quite a bit, 6.36%. San Francisco, California, 5.31%. And Scottsdale, Arizona at 4.78%. Now, guys, California, it did a big dive between November to December, so it's just kind of coming back. Month over month, you have San Francisco up 37.23%, San Jose up 26.4%, Carlsbad up 21.43%, Portsmouth, New Hampshire just jumped in there at 20.3%, and Seattle, Washington, 19%. Now, top cities with the largest increase to the 25-week average. I think this is an interesting look because it's going to show you that out of trend stuff that's happening. Hoboken, again, up there at 48.9%. Fort Myers, Florida, 23.39%. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 19.97%. Again, this is why I keep telling everybody, eyes on Florida. This is a very large market, and it drives just like it did in the GOC. It will drive it'll lead the narrative. Now, Texas is close. California is important. Tennessee is important. But Florida, it just has so many of these different themes: the short-term rental investing, the long-term rental investing, the new builds gone wild, the building to spec for large multi-million dollar properties. It just has everything. So keep your eyes there. Scottsdale, Arizona, up at 19.94%. Scottsdale made it here a couple of places, so I'm interesting. We're going to see what's going on there. And then Pembroke Pines, Florida, up 19.88%. Okay, and we're going to run through the top 10 of top cities with large percent increase in inventory year over year. Number 1, Fort Myers, Florida, at 53.3%. Bakersfield, California, 51.79%. Galveston, Texas, 36%. Fort Lauderdale, 27.5%. San Ramon, California, 24.66%. Knoxville, Tennessee, 22.11%. Denver, 15.82%. Johnson City, 15.67%. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, 13.47%. And West Palm Beach, 13.24%. And guys, the top 10 didn't change. And that's something we'll keep our eyes on. But year over year, so far, these are the cities that really have seen these massive increases in inventory. So very interesting to watch. Just for your reference, Atlanta, I believe, well, I'm going to say it and I don't know, so I'm just going to be quiet. In terms of the year over year inventory change, I think I had it up above, but it is up. Okay, since I mentioned it, I know I have it. Sorry, guys. One quick second here. But yeah, the year over year inventory was up 12.3%. My apologies, guys, for that little snafu. Okay, and this is something I've added into this Substack is just the average inventory change month over month for California, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, because these are going to be very important markets for this cycle. California, and this is month over month, up 14.39%. Florida up 11.47%. Tennessee up 2.59%. Texas up 5.94%. Now, year over year for those same states, California 1.84%, and that's because they had already been building inventory last year up to this point. Florida up 17.6%, Tennessee up 13.71%, and Texas up 19.79%. Okay, I'm going to go over quickly the listings for rent, just maybe do one of those and go to short-term rental because we didn't get to talk about it last time. But listings for rent were up 3.24% week over week, 2.04% compared to the 25-week average, and 3.24% month over month. And again, we don't have year over year. We'll have that starting in May. But top cities with highest percent increase of single-family rental listings, 128 to 24, week over week. Wexford County was up there, very small numbers. This is in Michigan, but up at 50%. Cleveland, Ohio at 21.24%. Phoenix, Arizona at 20.82%. Scottsdale, told you it was, we saw it in increases in inventory for sale, up at 18.64%, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, up at 15.15%. Okay, short-term rental. So top 5 decreases in short-term rental listings November to December. So this is really around December data. Boca Raton was down in Florida, down 7.96%. Detroit was down 7.59%. Knoxville, Tennessee, down 7.58%. Bentonville, Arkansas, down 5.94%. And Galveston, Texas, down 5.90%. So that was that's month over month. And then year over year, there were only five of the 80 cities that I track had short-term rental listings decreases. And this just goes to show you that we have not left mania land. Even as there were new hotels built, there have been more and more short term rentals listed, and these markets are completely oversaturated. I'm working on a new data source that scrapes daily and also has access to property management records. It's going to be a much better data source than what I'm using right now, so stay tuned. But we're using what we have right now. So the 5 places where there were decreases in short-term rentals, New York was number one at a decrease of 15.87%, and that's going to have to do with that short-term rental ban or the restrictions around you have to live in the home, um, etc. So Philadelphia is down 9.21%. Pembroke Pines, Florida, down 5.88%, probably because, not a ton of people want to stay in an Airbnb in Pembroke Pines. San Diego, California, down 0.78%, and Dallas down 0.41%. Okay, and so, Dallas also has that upcoming. So there was the ban, but now it's being challenged. The upcoming hearing is in June on that. So stay tuned for Dallas. Okay, so let's do average daily rate decreases. So top 5 decreases in short-term rental average daily rate, December 22 to December 23. Pembroke Pines down 27%, Florida. Portsmouth, New Hampshire down 18.23%. Bentonville, Arkansas down 14.97%. El Cajon, California down 12.55%. And Richmond, Virginia down 12.19%. And Kennycat, PhD, this is for you. Honorable mention, Nashville was down 11.82%. Okay, for commercial real estate, we already talked about New York Community Bank. The regional banks are very exposed here for commercial real estate. And guys, it I think I've probably logged almost 10,000 miles across this country. And the commercial real estate problem, as I've said probably multiple times, and you're sick of hearing it, is way bigger than everyone realizes. This is not just about work from home. This is about years of overbuilding. This is about abandoning Class B buildings and trying to go all luxury and trying to put all kinds of snazzy stuff in there without any thoughtful planning around the existing inventory out there. And this is why I often say I'm bullish bulldozers. Okay, guys, I hope everyone's week is starting out okay. Not too hungover, maybe from the Super Bowl, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful week. There's a lot of data and information coming your way. Next stop, Charlotte. I hope that one's going to be a little bit easier to write because I feel like with the Atlanta Post, I created a template, but I also spent a lot of time in the Atlanta Post kind of setting up the backdrop of the South and how over time, there have always been grand ideas. If we talk about bubble in the sun in Florida, we talk about swamp peddlers. There's always been these grand ideas about the revitalization of the South since the Civil War. But the structural issues have never been addressed, and we've done it again. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the support you guys give me every single week. Hoping to get caught up on comments this week. You can reach me. The best place to reach me is probably on X Twitter, at me there, at M3_Melody, Melody. My Substack, M3 Melody Substack, and of course here on YouTube. But I just want to say a huge thanks, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week. See you again soon. Bye.